This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. If you had a pandemic and a pancake controversy on your 2020 bingo card, you might be the only one. Let's get you caught up right quick. This might be the most important chart in America right now. It shows the number of new cases of COVID-19 across the US has held relatively steady over the past several weeks. But you wouldn't know that based on how quickly many states are moving to reopen and return to semi-normal life.
We do not have to choose between either returning to jobs or protecting health care.
In Texas, Governor Greg Abbott is moving ahead with the third phase of the state's reopening, despite seeing a record high number of new COVID cases this week as the state expands testing. Nationwide, at least 115,000 people have now died in this pandemic. Joe Biden is sharing his thoughts on how to safely reopen the country.
The American people have sacrificed so much to fight this virus. We've lost lives. We've lost businesses. We've lost paychecks. And now, thanks to Donald Trump's bungling, we may lose some of the progress we've begun to make.
The Democratic presidential candidate made a stop in Darby, Pennsylvania today. The state is considered a key battleground in the upcoming election, and as we get closer to November, both Biden and Trump are trying to figure out how best to campaign during the pandemic. President Trump is preparing for his first rally since March on Saturday in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Aunt Jemima. Perfect pancakes in 10 shakes.
Aunt Jemima is headed for retirement after Quaker Oats decided that 131 years is too long to feature an enslaved woman on a box of pancake mix. The company said in a statement that they recognize Aunt Jemima's image was based off a racist stereotype, and updates to her image over the years, like her ditching the head wrap, wasn't enough. The company said they'll start rolling out a name and image change to the brand as soon as this fall.
These are the 11 charges against Officer Roth. The first charge is felony murder. This is the death that is as a result of a underlying felony. And in this case, the underlying felony is aggravated assault.
That was Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard announcing charges against the officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks, a 27-year-old black man. Brooks was shot while running from police officers after being stopped and questioned at a fast food restaurant for being intoxicated. Brooks' death sparked calls for justice in Atlanta and elsewhere. The officer who shot Brooks has been fired. In 2017, the Riverside County, California Sheriff's Department arrested Philip Garcia and took him into custody. Neighbors say the 51-year-old man was screaming and behaving oddly. 44 hours after being taken into custody, he was dead. ProPublica obtained footage of Garcia's detainment showing guards using force on a man in a psychiatric crisis. Newsy's Jamal Andrews spoke to ProPublica about the footage.
As America evaluates police brutality and reform, one topic seemingly missing from the discussion is mental health. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, almost 2 million people with mental illness are booked into jails each year. As the world protests police brutality on the street, ProPublica looked inside the system. On Tuesday, they released findings from an investigation into misconduct in the death of Philip Garcia, an inmate at California's Riverside County Jail.
A person in mental crisis dying in law enforcement custody.
17 hours of video chronicled the last moments of Garcia's life, which he spent tied down to a gurney, suffering a psychotic break. Thalia Beatty was the lead reporter on the investigation.
Is this death an outlier? A terrible, extreme example of something that never should have happened? Or is it symptomatic of the way that this department operates? And what we learned is that there are big issues in the sheriff's department and within the way that healthcare and mental health care is provided to inmates.
Garcia was originally arrested for allegedly assaulting his roommate and business partner after police responded to a call about him smashing a neighbor's window. He displayed erratic behavior that experts told ProPublica was more than likely due to some kind of mental health crisis. But instead of being treated for a mental breakdown, Garcia spent the next 18 hours in isolation before ultimately being restrained. During his 44 hours in police custody, Garcia spent more than 20 hours with his arms and legs tied down. Riverside County Sheriff's deputies are seen on video pressing a plastic shield onto Garcia's face, using a stinger grenade and other significant uses of force.
One thing that really stood out to me is that the Sheriff's Department itself concluded that no wrongdoing occurred in this case. No one particularly did anything wrong. And I think that the footage shows that if that's the case, then there is something very disturbing about what is normal and okay in these systems.
Records obtained by ProPublica show Garcia suffered from a potentially fatal condition, which is brought on by overexertion. But the deputies and nurses working with Garcia appeared oblivious to his condition. Garcia's death was ruled a homicide by the local county coroner. While Garcia's story is particularly gruesome, Beatty says it reflects a larger problem in county jails across the country.
There was a decision in the 1950s to shut down large mental health institutions. And for reason, because those institutions were very inhumane. And today, basically no large mental health institutions exist except in jails.
Beatty says Garcia's story is not unique, and these tragedies that take place behind jailhouse walls deserve the same critical eye as any other form of police brutality.
The way that people view jails is that they're a place for bad people who are dangerous to society. And I think advocates for more humane jail and prison systems would tell you that they are a part of the community, inseparable from the community. This story is just one of a litany in California alone of people dying in restraints, dying because of a lack of medical attention, dying after being tear gassed. It is just not unique, unfortunately.
Jamal Andrus, Newsy, Chicago.
Quick question. What's the price per day for deploying a single National Guardsman to Washington, D.C. for crowd control?
We take a step away from the noise and spin to really hear and tell the stories that need to be told. Newsy cuts through.
When protests broke out in the nation's capital earlier this month, the Defense Department deployed the National Guard to protect the city from its own people. Newsy's Patrick Terpstra delves into the cost of that controversial move.
You know, the civil disturbance mission came together pretty quickly.
Brigadier General Mark Maldonado took us behind the scenes of the National Guard's controversial deployment in Washington. This giant armory 2 miles from the Capitol building was the staging ground for 5,100 Guard members sent from 11 states and D.C. They were among federal forces dispatched by the Trump administration to stop violence and looting during demonstrations against police brutality and racial injustice. Here, Guard troops got briefed on how to talk to protesters. Before heading out, they picked up assignments, riot gear, and initially, weapons.
Some folks were armed, but no weapons were fired.
National Guard members were at Lafayette Square across the street from the White House Monday, June 1st. That's when the world saw peaceful demonstrators forced back just before President Trump walked across the park to raise a Bible at St. John's Church, damaged by arson. Can you walk us through what the National Guard's role was in pushing protesters out of Lafayette Square?
I don't know about pushing protesters out of Lafayette Square. I've seen some of the footage, and some of the media's got it right, some of the media got it wrong.
It looked like they were pushed.
Yeah, so our job was simply there to provide a presence.
He said the Guard was not on the front lines that moved against protesters. That's backed up by a Washington Post reconstruction of the clash that put the Guard behind Park Police in the front.
Our job was not there to push our neighbors. Our job was there to help so that folks who were doing peaceful protests can continue to do that.
Were you aware that there was going to be that push to extend the perimeter at that time?
I can't talk to that. I'm not sure about that. The National Guard patrolled city streets and protected federal property around the White House at a cost of $531 per person each day. That covered pay, travel, and accommodations. In the end, the deployment cost at least $21 million, according to the Guard, a figure that does not include aircraft used in the mission. Multiple states and the Guard told us the federal government and ultimately the American taxpayer will cover all expenses.
The whole thing was a show by the president.
Maryland Senator and Democrat Chris Van Hollen told us the Guard presence was a waste of money that inflamed tensions. The D.C. National Guard is investigating whether a helicopter was used inappropriately to disperse a crowd by hovering over protesters. Van Hollen says the Defense Department should have listened to the mayor who said local police could and should have handled the unrest.
You had his Secretary of Defense talking about the battle space. I mean, this was ridiculous, the battle space against peaceful protesters in the District of Columbia.
Maldonado says the National Guard operation was necessary and peaceful. Videos posted by the D.C. National Guard on Facebook show troops smiling with protesters, some of them extending an elbow to bump.
Many of us here feel the same thing, and folks out there who are protesting are feeling too. So our job is to ensure that we protect people, that we protect property, and we allow for folks to keep doing those things. That ensures our democracy and our way of life.
With cleanup underway and smaller but persistent protests in the city now, Guard members from out of state have gone home. Patrick Terpstra, Newsy, Washington.
When you're back, we'll take a quick trip to Mississippi's Catfish Kingdom. At Newsy, we believe opinions are a beautiful thing.
But they belong to you, not us.
You're entitled to your own opinions, not ours.
Watch Newsy. Be informed, not influenced.
As the first black owner of a catfish plant in the U.S., Edie Scott Jr. built an empire, lost it to discrimination and land robbery, then fought to take it back. Our Newsy documentary Catfish Kingdom tells the story of how a farmer became a legend of the Mississippi Delta. Here's a part of it.
My dad, Ed Scott, he loved farming. He went to serve in the war, World War II. And when he got back, he wanted to stay at home and farm with his dad. And his dad tried to convince him, but he told him no, he was going to stay at home and farm with him. In the late 70s, early 80s, agriculture was really declining in the South. And so the local FSA agent had told them that if they didn't grow catfish, then they need not come in for money because they wasn't going to cash flow with cotton. So my dad and my brother started building catfish ponds. They dug and built 8 catfish ponds on 160 acres of land. The county agent came out and saw them digging. He asked him, "Who told you to dig catfish pond?" He said, "Well, you said if we didn't have catfish ponds, we couldn't get it." He said, "Well, I'm not giving you any money for catfish ponds." And so my dad, they kept digging because he didn't believe him.
It would take $400,000 to stock them ponds, feed them out, and buy all the equipment for the fish. They gave me $150,000. And they just gave me enough money to get me in trouble and thought that was it. But I didn't let that stop me. I kept going.
So we just watched Catfish Kingdom. It's a beautiful piece by Alex Travis and Jennifer Smart. We had a few more questions for Alex, so we decided to invite her on the show. Alex Travis, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing so well. Are you ready to play a game of Explain This?
I'm ready when you are.
All right, so we're gonna start with the first image. Alex, can you explain this? Who are these women?
So these women were called the Dependables. They worked with Mr. Scott at his catfish processing plant. But these women were always there, working hard, taking care of business. They were running it like it was their own.
All right, so let's go to the second image then. Can you please explain this?
So that's a picture of Mr. Scott. Something that we learned a lot about his family was that they were very much interested in, having nice cars, having a nice appearance, trying to get that respect from the community. And that was one of the reasons that the people at the loan office wouldn't give him a loan. They thought he had too nice of a car.
Let's get to the last image. Alex, can you please explain this?
what is left of the processing plant now, they have this historical marker, which basically, validates everything that Mr. Scott went through.
What is it that you want people to take away from a story like this?
And what Welena, his daughter, really wanted us to understand was that her dad, never gave up.
Alex, thank you for joining me, and hopefully we can do this in person sometime.
Yes, thank you, Christian.
Next up, we're looking abroad to see how the coronavirus could further threaten a country in crisis.
We're the ones that created this mess, and we're passing it on to our kids. And they're going to look at us one day and say, what the hell are you thinking about? What was you thinking about?
It's getting hotter here in the US, but across the southern hemisphere, countries are seeing colder temperatures that are only making COVID-19 even tougher to deal with. That includes Brazil, where a health crisis and an economic crisis are colliding in a way that could reshape the country.
Latin America's largest country is hurting. Deaths from COVID-19 each day in Brazil are currently the highest in the world, and the country's democracy is under serious threat.
There is this epidemic, there is a terrible social and economic crisis, and the government is going against everything that could help us.
Far-right President Jair Bolsonaro is under fire for obstructing governors' responses to the virus and for trying to overstep his authority.
He goes to these demonstrations without masks and everything, but also he's doing things that he cannot do as a president of the country.
The Brazilian Supreme Court is investigating allegations that Bolsonaro fired a federal police chief to protect his son from corruption charges. Another inquiry is looking into a disinformation campaign that appears to have helped Bolsonaro get elected in 2018.
It's not a question of finding if there was something wrong or not. I think there was. The question was, who will do this politically?
Bolsonaro could be removed from office by Congress via impeachment or by the courts via an annulment of his election.
So is it likely? I don't know. I think there's a lot of wishful thinking. If I say yes, it is likely, it might be because I really want that to happen. I want this nightmare to end.
In the meantime, the increasingly embattled president is escalating threats of a military takeover to protect his presidency. Few in Brazil actually believed the military would agree to back Bolsonaro and participate in a coup. Still, the threats have outsized significance in a country that only ended its military dictatorship 35 years ago.
My personal guess is that the military is just waiting to see what the Supreme Court and what the Congress decides about the situation.
For now, the Supreme Court and other leaders in Brazil are doing their part to keep Bolsonaro in check and fight the virus, which is disproportionately hitting minorities.
The groups that are more marginalized are really hurting, indigenous people, people in the favelas, etc.
For Newsy, I'm Ben Chamiso.
Zipping around the country and around the world by airplane seems like a distant memory for a lot of people right now, including me. And that plummeting demand, especially for work travel, has created a pretty scary future for the airline industry. Newsy's Virology series has been breaking down this pandemic since day one. Kevin Clancy tells us how our new work-from-home reality could reshape air travel in the long run.
As the coronavirus spread globally, a canceled work trip here and there turned into a worldwide shutdown for business travel by air. The global airline industry is now on the brink of collapse, and while pressing pause for a few days or a week is strange enough, a freeze on business class travel that lasts for weeks or months has the potential to reshape why people fly.
Work from home. Work from home. Working from home, that is the new normal. And what will it mean for the
I fly for business.
business?
As in making money.
I need to be thinking about my meeting.
After a decade of huge growth, airlines are preparing for a staggering drop in revenue worldwide. Concerns over the coronavirus have crippled demand for flights, which in turn has caused many airlines to ground their fleets and lay off staff.
It's as least as bad as 9/11, if not worse.
But even with a bailout, it could take months for travelers to fully return to the skies. In the meantime, a lot of business will go on without air travel. With huge advances in telecommuting and a growing acceptance of working from home, businesses have taken to platforms like Slack, Zoom, and Skype to carry on with meetings while many miles apart. To understand the impact of losing business class travel, you have to understand how valuable business class tickets are to airlines. It might just be a few seats, but on many flights, premium seats actually account for most of the money the flight will make. Let's explain. Let's look at a round-trip flight scheduled for the first week in August between JFK and LAX. The round-trip fare for an economy passenger costs about $500. For a business class passenger, that seat is about $1,800. And finally, for a first-class passenger, the cost is $2,000. In total, if everyone pays full price for their ticket, the airline makes roughly $97,000. But notice the distribution? If you do the math, you see that although business and first-class travelers only make up 28% of the passengers on the flight, they account for 60% of the flight's revenue. This model doesn't describe every flight, but when it comes to airline economics, business and first-class passengers have an outsized impact on many airlines' revenue.
They care a lot about business travelers. Again, the other part about the business travelers is not just the seat, but business travelers tend to become very connected with your brand, and they fly a lot. So it's not just the money they make from the one seat, but from all of the money that they make for you over time.
That's Dr. Andy Boyd, who literally wrote the book on airline ticket pricing. He believes airlines could bounce back, but he also says the virus could accelerate some trends already in motion for business travel.
It could be a catalyst. But what's really interesting, the new generation of people have grown up with technology, with cell phones. The fact that you're doing what many older people would call very informal communication is more and more accepted as a form of formal communication. So as young people who've grown up with technology get older, they may find that they're just as happy doing things over the phone as they are getting on a plane and going somewhere. So there are a lot of different things that are converging to perhaps reduce the proportion of people that will be traveling, especially for business.
Those combined factors could spell long-term impacts for the airline industry beyond the spread of the coronavirus.
And normally, I would tend to say, we'll just get over it and the world will go back to normal. But this particular virus and the way people have responded to it, we may see some actual real changes to the way both business travelers and economy travelers travel.
That's it for us. As always, thanks for tuning in, especially to our younger viewers, such as my niece, who's in the highly valued 0 to 1 demographic. We'll be back here same time, same place for more In the Loop tomorrow. More top stories are headed your way right now.